Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan, coming to you from the National Weather Service through a unique partnership with Alaska Public Media. We're in the closing couple of days here of 2022. It is Thursday, December 29th. And if you'd like additional weather information, you can go to weather.gov. That is the National Weather Service's online presence. It'll bring you to a map of the continental U.S. with Alaska and Hawaii to the lower left. You point and click anywhere on this map, it'll bring up forecast and any relevant watches, warnings, or advisory, along with much more information. Looking at the continental U.S. this Thursday afternoon, we have a number of winter weather advisories, winter storm warnings, flood watches for areas of the interior west as well as California. There will be a series of storms coming in off the Pacific that'll affect these areas here through the holiday weekend into next week. In fact, a pretty good storm is going to move across California as we go through New Year's Eve day and New Year's Day itself. Out further east in through the Central Plains, we're going to see warmer temperatures east of the Mississippi River that could lead to some flooding after some very significant winter storm snowfalls there in areas of the Great Lakes. Here in Alaska, we still have some blowing snow. Dalton Highway up there through Adigan Pass. Winter weather advisory is in effect till 3 a.m. tonight. Otherwise, we can continue to expect slowly moderating temperatures here going into the early new year. Rather quiet weather should prevail across the interior through the new year. However, southern portions of the state and along the Gulf, including areas of the southwest, will start to get back into a more active weather pattern here for the new year. Wind, mixed precipitation, even the potential for freezing rain, especially centered on south central areas. Freezing rain could impact areas of the western Kenai, Anchorage Bowl up in the Matsu, and Copper River valleys as we go from New Year's Eve, Saturday night, especially New Year's Day into Monday. So keep that in mind if you have any travel plans in areas of South Central for this New Year's weekend. Looking at a few of the FAA webcams, Anativik Pass showing some blowing snow 7 degrees above. We go further west, Savunga there on St. Lawrence Island reporting light snow and fog 9 above. And some rather brisk winds will be setting up there off the northern Bering Sea and out of Norton Sound. It's going to help push the ice further south and west. Through the weekend and early next week, the ice could push further south and west by some 50 to 60 miles here into early next week. Across the Anchorage area, downtown Merrill, mostly cloudy, 18 degrees. Skies are mostly cloudy, but with a few breaks. Again, keep in mind, these areas could be impacted by some freezing rain here over the course of the New Year's weekend. Wrangell in this far southern panhandle, interior there at least of the inner channels there, the panhandle, light rain 37 degrees, and you see a few flecks on that image I included. There's 3 eagles in that particular webcam shot. Well, hazards in terms of advisories, we have just one until 3 a.m. this Friday morning for the eastern Brooks Range, namely Adigan Pass there, the Dalton Highway, for some blowing snow. Near Fairbanks, North Pole is under an air quality alert into tomorrow morning. And then further south, we have the south central areas are under a special weather statement to highlight the potential for wind and mixed precipitation, including the possibility of some freezing rain as we go from very late Saturday, New Year's Eve, into New Year's Day and Monday. Areas that could be impacted with freezing rain include those around the northern portion of Cook Inlet, including Soldotna, Kenai, areas also there in the Turnagain Pass, Portage, Anchorage Bowl, on up to Palmer and Wasilla. Further east, the Copper River Basin, including Copper Center, and as we head east toward McCarthy. So definitely keep that in mind if you have any travel plans coming up here for the long holiday weekend. And looking at the satellite imagery, we have a few areas of low pressure extending from the northeastern Gulf all the way back across into the lower Bering Sea, and then another one south of the eastern Aleutians. And it'll keep the weather semi-active. The main weather system coming in, though, later on this weekend. There'll be a stronger low lift out of the North Pacific with a stronger storm and gale force front that works its way up in through the Gulf, and especially the Western Gulf and into south central areas, bringing that milder, moist air that could lead to areas of some freezing rain, especially where temperatures remain colder near the Earth's surface, but the air warms aloft. That's not a good combination, especially as we get into the heart of wintertime. And the satellite imagery again shows that we have, if you look south of Unalaska, there's a curl in the clouds. That's one area of low pressure. Also further north, we continue to have some brisk winds running out of the northeast down through the lower Chukchi Sea and in and across St. Lawrence. That's going to help push the ice further southwestward this weekend into early next week. So here's the string of low pressures that extend from just southwest of the Panhandle back to just south of Kodiak Island, north of the eastern Aleutians in the southeast Bering, and then another low south of the eastern Aleutians. Later tonight, early Friday morning, we have another low, little compact low lifting north out of the northeast Pacific up toward Haida Gwaii, and then a cluster of a few lows there as you get out toward the Alaska Peninsula, back toward and north of the central Aleutians. Friday afternoon, we have weak high pressure over northwest Canada. See those lows continuing. One, you're just south of Haida Gwaii, another south of the Alaska Peninsula, and another south of the central Aleutians. By Saturday, we'll start to see a stronger low lift out of the North Pacific with a triple point low south of Kodiak. This is going to have a lot of moisture and warmer temperatures being brought in aloft with that warm front. And as that runs up into the coastal mountains and tries to push further inland, we're going to have that warmer air overrunning the colder surface temperatures, and that's why we're concerned about areas of some freezing rain, especially in south central Alaska, and that threat would be primarily from New Year's Eve and especially New Year's Day into Monday. Temperature-wise, Friday morning lows are going to be above freezing in through the southern and outer Panhandle coast. Inner areas could be near or below freezing, certainly north ends, Juneau on up toward Skagway and Haines. Could be as cold as 15 below Glen Ellen there in the Copper River Basin, 10 below over the other side of the Alaska range at McGrath. Friday afternoon, highs could be back up around or just above 40 in areas of the Panhandle from Ositka down through Craig and Ketchikan. And then further west, it stays below zero. That cold air pools up there in the Copper River Basin. Still highs only in maybe 23 for Anchorage Bowl, so chilly temperatures holding the cold air there. And then for Saturday morning, we expect lows generally above freezing in the southern half of the Panhandle. Temperatures may moderate just a little to near 20 or so for Anchorage, and then up to the north, still a bit below zero there in through the Copper River Basin. And temperatures Saturday afternoon, again lower 40s, the outer southern and western coast of the Panhandle, back up around 40, Kodiak southwestward. And temperatures remain below freezing, at least in the lower elevations from Anchorage northward up into the lower Mat-Su Valley. Across the far north, many temperatures are going to be below zero tonight, not as harshly cold as they have been earlier in the month. Nevertheless, places like Fort Yukon, back toward Point Lake, could be in that 15 to 20 below range. Daytime highs generally in the single digits above or below zero across much of the interior, North Slope. Could be around 10 or 12 degrees surrounding Norton Sound. And then Saturday morning lows a bit colder. Could see some 10 to 20 below readings along the Yukon Middle and Upper Yukon River, as well as up along the Arctic coast. And temperatures Saturday afternoon, again, single digits above and below zero, fairly common, but at least relatively quieter weather there. In through the southwest, Friday morning lows could be below zero, upper Kuskokwim Basin, otherwise generally at or above freezing along the Alaska Peninsula, eastern half of the Aleutians. Friday afternoon highs will be coldest as you get up toward the middle Yukon and upper Kuskokwim Basins. Temperatures will generally be above freezing. King Salmon southwestward could be 40 at Dutch Harbor, and Saturday morning lows could be at or below zero as you get up the middle and middle Yukon, upper Kuskokwim rivers, with daytime highs Saturday afternoon back up to 40 from Kodiak southwestward down through Chitnik and Dutch Harbor. Here's the temperature outlook. Above normal temperatures across much of the state for early in the new year, with the exception of near normal for the Panhandle. And then precipitation is expected to average a bit above normal around Cook Inlet, the Kenai Peninsula, but below normal along and north of the Yukon River through the Brooks Range, and a little bit below normal in the Panhandle.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
It's now time for your pre-New Year holiday weekend weather, and we are taking a look at a changing weather pattern here that's going to arrive with the new year and beyond. We're going to start to see a series of low pressures lift out of the north and northeastern Pacific up into the Gulf. This is going to bring in warmer, moist air along the Gulf Coast and eventually push some of that through the interior. Temperatures overall statewide will continue to slowly moderate with this pattern shift. In the meantime, Friday morning we expect IFR conditions along the spine of the Brooks Range back through western northwest areas of the state. Also IFR conditions across much of the Panhandle and then along the southwest coast, including Bristol and Kuskokwim Bays back out toward St. Paul and St. Matthew. Friday afternoon, still IFR conditions lingering in areas around the northern half, the Panhandle, upper area there of Yakutat Bay, and then also back through the northwest and along the Brooks Range, as well as the southwest coast, including Nunavik Island, back through St. Paul and St. Matthew. Saturday morning, we expect a low-pressure system is going to begin to lift out of the North Pacific south of the Alaska Peninsula and well south of Kodiak Island, but that's going to bring a storm force front that's going to be lifting northward across the Gulf. And ahead of it, there will be strong east and southeast gale and storm force winds. IFR conditions will expand again across the Panhandle, pockets of it along the northwestern and western Gulf Coast in through the Alaska Peninsula, as well as continuing along the southwest coast and areas of IFR north slope along the spine of the Brooks Range into the Arctic coast. Saturday afternoon, we can see hints of that system, the deeper moisture entering the lower southwestern Gulf and south of the Alaska Peninsula. IFR conditions should prevail Saturday afternoon across much of the Panhandle, back out through areas of the southwest coast, Nunavik Island, back towards St. Matthew, St. Paul, and pockets up through Kotzebue Sound and areas along the Brooks Range, both in the west and east. Anatuvik Pass should generally see IFR conditions Friday, as will Adigan Pass there in the Brooks Range. Further south and west, Lake Clark and Merrill MVFR anticipated in the western arm of the Alaska Range. Rainy Pass MVFR. Windy Pass should hold on to VFR conditions for Friday. And as we go further east, Isabel, generally VFR conditions are anticipated. Mentasta may see a period of MVFR conditions, especially the northern half of the pass, Friday early in the day, but giving way to VFR. Tanita Pass is looking to be generally MVFR. There could be a very brief period of VFR early in the day. Same thing at Portage Pass. Generally MVFR conditions are anticipated Friday. And then further east into the northern, far northern Panhandle, Chilkoot and White will see IFR conditions. Freezing levels, there's not much warm air to be found. The surface freezing line runs across the north end of the Alaska Peninsula to just north of Kodiak Island along the outer Seward, Kenai coast, and then extending down through the central interior channels of the Panhandle. There is a little bump in freezing levels aloft south of Haida Gwaii with a little weak compact low that's going to bring some precipitation that way Friday, where there could be pockets of moderate icing. There could also be a little moderate icing there, areas around, say Gustavus westward out over the Gulf. But otherwise, freezing levels are generally going to be 2,000 feet above that along the Brooks Range, above 6,000 feet south of the Alaska Peninsula, and then falling back to above 2,000 feet as you venture further northward up through the Bering Sea. Jet stream level winds winds are not that impressive. The real strong jet stream winds are well south of the Gulf of Alaska for the time being. That will begin to change later this weekend as that stronger low emerges with the storm force front. At 9,000 feet, 700 millibars, we anticipate weak high pressure circulation out toward east end of Norton Sound, and as further south, low pressure circulation south, well south of Kodiak Island and south of the central Aleutians. At 3,000 feet, we see a few weaker lows with some circulations around them, but as I mentioned, the stronger storm force front will be lifting northeastward up into the Gulf, especially the latter half of Saturday into New Year's Day. In the meantime, for Friday, some pockets of moderate turbulence along the north central Gulf Coast, areas around the entrance of Cook Inlet, east side of Kodiak Island, back into Bristol Bay, as well as St. Lawrence, and then way out in the far western Aleutians.
Howdy, Starfinders. Happy Perihelion Day. Next week on January 4th, we are closer to the sun than at any point in the year. We'll reach exact perihelion at 1:52 a.m. Eastern on January 4th. Perihelion happens because Earth's orbit is slightly oblong, meaning that this week we are 3.2 million miles closer to the sun than in July. Even though we're closer to the sun, the northern hemisphere is having winter because of the tilt of our planet. That indirect light keeps the north in the cold, but gives the southern hemisphere a hot summer. If you watch the skies this week at 1:52 a.m., you'll see the moon to the bottom of Mars and right next to the Pleiades on the 3rd, and then on top of Mars on the 4th, Perihelion Day. Take a nap and come back and face northeast before the sun rises, and look for the quadrantid's meteor shower, and on the 6th is the full wolf moon. Happy New Year, everyone, and keep looking up.
We're at Vandenberg Air Force Base. We're about 20 minutes before the launch of ICESat-2. You might see the white light off in the distance. That's the Delta II rocket.
It kind of feels like an idea that was always going to just stay an idea. But no, it's real. It's sitting on top of the rocket.
You know, and for me, it's kind of surreal. Like you say, it's been 10 years, and it's hard to believe. It's like, we're really here? This is really about to happen? It's totally cool.
This is Dr. Tom Newman. Over the years, his work has taken him to some pretty remote areas to study changes in the ice regions of our planet. And his research, among many others, has defined the goals of the new NASA satellite, the Ice, Cloud, and Land Elevation Satellite 2, or ICESat-2.
And we have ignition. And
the story of ICESat-2 really begins with ICESat-1. ICESat told us all kinds of cool things about the ice sheet and about sea ice that we didn't really know to ask. That data allowed us to measure elevation change of ice sheets in a way that we hadn't been able to before, and showed that all the action on the ice sheets, the places that were really changing quickly, were around the edges. So when we were thinking about what could we do better next time, we knew that was one key component.
In addition to the edges of the ice sheets, ICESat-2 needed to measure a dimension of sea ice that remained elusive: its thickness. To figure out how thick sea ice is, you can measure the height of ice sticking out of the ocean, or freeboard, and compare it to the height of water between the sea ice flows, called leads.
The problem is, sea ice is really dynamic, and those cracks open and close various places in the ice pack throughout the day, throughout the year, and what we need to do is have measurements of the ocean whenever it's available, wherever it occurs in the sea ice pack.
To solve that problem, ICESat-2 was designed with a fast-pulsing laser instrument to take precise, near-continuous measurements across its 3 pairs of beams. For 10 years, everything about the mission was designed to measure rapid changes in the most rapidly changing part of the cryosphere. But it has to get into space first.
But it's a huge transition going from the ground to in space. We've spent better part of 10 years, thousands of people have been involved, and actually seeing the rocket there on the pad with all of that work kind of all put together in one place, it's pretty amazing. And then getting up in the middle of the night to go watch the actual launch, it's sort of surreal in a way, because you've put so much time into it for so long, and actually seeing it over there is like, whoa, you know, it's a big deal.
4, 3, 2, 1, 0. That's off. That's 1.
That was awesome. Totally cool. There it went. That was Atlas. Last Delta II, heading on out. So Atlas has been turned on over the course of the first few weeks of the mission, really culminating for us with the laser. So this is our first look at sea ice data from ICESat-2, and it looks fantastic. The signal levels look great. We've got plenty of photons there. We're capturing ridges. We can clearly see the ocean. All sorts of cool stuff in there, and this is just our first data. It's only going to get better from here on out.
The data from ICESat-2 is well on its way into digging deeper into the unknown dimensions of sea ice sheets, and glaciers. It will shed light on changes in sea level and global weather patterns, and once again find new things about ice we didn't know to ask.
So my heart is definitely racing. I don't know about anyone else's. This is the stuff nerds dream of.
Slight chance the flight may see ICESat-2 in their center windscreen. 10 seconds. 9, 8, 7, 6, that's gonna 5, 4, 3, 2.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Well, here is the final segment of our show, the marine weather, and first we start with the sea ice edge. Ice is extensive across the far north through the Beaufort Sea, Chukchi Sea, and down through the Bering Strait, including Norton Sound and surrounding St. Lawrence Island, and we do expect with some brisk northeast winds that the ice will continue to move south and westward of St. Lawrence Island to perhaps near St. Matthew as we get into early next week. Ice is extensive too down through the Kuskokwim and Bristol Bay areas, and we see the ice at least temporarily reorganizing there in the northern portion of Cook Inlet after the strong winds Friday there before Christmas. We are going to see a push of milder air try to come up through the western Gulf as we go through the new year. In the meantime, for the inner channels of the Panhandle, southeast winds to 20 knots, gust up to 35 Petersburg with waves 4 to as high as 8 feet down toward Dixon Entrance. North winds to 20 knots, 3-foot waves there in Lynn Canal. And then the outer Gulf Coast, we're expecting southeast to south winds 20 to 25 knots, waves generally 10 to 12 feet. On Saturday, for the inner channels, north winds at Lynn Canal, 15 knots, 3-foot waves. Winds with an easterly component at Petersburg as well as Ketchikan with waves of 4 to 7 feet. And then the outer Gulf Coast, we're expecting winds generally 15 to 20 knots, waves running right around 10 feet. For the northwestern Gulf on Friday, northeast winds in Prince William Sound to 10 knots, waves 2 feet. Those winds, northeast winds, will pick up there through the lower portion of Cook Inlet to 25 knots with waves of 8 to 9 feet. And then generally winds with either an east or southerly component off the Kenai coast at 15 knots and waves 10 to 12 feet. On Saturday, the flow is going to be increasing out of the east and northeast ahead of a low pressure that will be situated well south of the Alaska Peninsula, but a stronger storm force front will be lifting northward into the western Gulf by Sunday. So ahead of that, we expect winds to 40 knots there at the entrance of Cook Inlet with waves 12 to as high as 20 feet. The areas around Prince William Sound, east winds to 25 knots, waves 6 feet, and generally 35-knot gales with waves of 11 feet along the eastern Kenai coast. And for Friday, around Kodiak Island, winds southerly 20 to 25 knots, waves as high as 13 feet on the western Gulf side of things. And as we go into into Bristol Bay, east winds to 20 knots, waves a few feet, variable winds 10 knots north of Cold Bay with 3-foot waves. On Saturday, as that low will be situated well south of Kodiak Island and the Alaska Peninsula, we're seeing 40 to 45 knot east-southeast gales from Kodiak Island down to off at Chiknik, with waves building 13 to 15 feet, even upwards of 18 feet in Shelikof Strait. Look for northeast to east winds 30 knots from Bristol Bay down to north of Cold Bay with waves of 5 to as high as 9 feet. For the eastern Aleutians, there's going to be winds out of the east-southeast, 20 knots or so. Low pressure center just southwest of Atka and southeast of Adak. In the backside of that, winds increase to the north at 30 knots with waves 12 feet west of Adak. For Saturday, look for the main low center southeast of the eastern Aleutians. Winds northeast to north 25 to 30 knots across the central eastern Aleutians. Waves 10-11 feet on the North Pacific side and 7 to 9 feet on the Bering side. For Friday, along the southwest coast, including Norton Sound, winds 20 knots there in Norton Sound with ice in place. Winds will increase to as high as 30 knots south of St. Lawrence and near St. Matthew. Ice will try to push a little further south and certainly westward with this pattern. Waves as high as 12 feet around St. Matthew. Saturday, winds turn more northeasterly as that low and that storm force front begins to approach from the North Pacific into the lower Gulf, and we're expecting winds anywhere from 25 to as high as 35 knots out of the northeast, with waves as high as anywhere from 6 feet St. Paul to 12 feet in the vicinity of St. Matthew. Arctic coast east winds 15 to 20 knots, ice in place, turning northerly to 20 knots, accelerating to 30 knots through the Bering Strait with ice in place. And for Saturday, look for east winds 10 to 15 knots along the Arctic coast, turning northerly through the lower Chukchi Sea and passing through the Bering Strait, increasing to north-northeast to 35 knots on the north side of St. Lawrence, with some areas of blowing snow likely. So that wraps up the show. Have yourself a happy new year.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.